Chapter 1, When Destiny Calls. Sophia Miller pulled her long blonde hair back into a ponytail before slipping into her favorite jacket, the beautiful robin red anorak that her fiancé Daniel had given to her for her birthday. Sprinting out into the cool autumn air, Sophia did not even mind that the dew on the grass was seeping through her tennis shoes. She was just in too good a mood today to be bothered by such things. She tried keeping her pace fast and checked her wristwatch, knowing that Daniel did not like it when she was late. It was already 7:45 am, and she and Daniel had agreed to meet at Asbury Park at 8 am sharp that morning. There was suddenly a deeper chill forming in the air, and Sophia gratefully buried her hands in the roomy anorak's deep pockets for warmth. She glanced longingly at the coffee shop on the corner, wishing she could stop it, but she knew she had to hurry. Her little hometown of Fairfield was quiet at that time of day, with only an occasional car driving by and even fewer pedestrians. Sighing with relief, Sophia reached Asbury Park with 5 minutes to spare, and running now at a slight jog, she crossed the familiar threshold of the park's archway entrance. The birch trees had already shed much of their leaves. Autumn was Sophia's favorite season, and she smiled at the crunching sound they made under her feet as she jogged. The leaves left on the trees were still vibrant with the hues of honeyed yellows, bright reds, and greens, but the distinct bite in the air was unmistakably heralding in the soon arrival of winter. Sophia spotted Daniel immediately. He was waiting for her at the park's pavilion. She waved at him excitedly, noting that instead of the cheerful blue knit cap and scarf that he usually wore, he had on a dull gray cap and a long gray matching scarf. For some reason Sophia did not like the color change, and as she got closer to Daniel she frowned, not liking the look on his face at all. The day seemed to be taking an unexpected upsetting turn, and so Sophia, needing a minute to adjust, slowed her pace and began chewing at her bottom lip, an unwanted habit she had developed during her more stressful college days. She finally reached the picnic table where Daniel was sitting, and became even more alarmed as he hung his head at the sight of her. And instead of the usual bright smile he had always greeted her with, he looked tight-lipped and closed off. Feeling quite anxious and ill at ease now, Sophia sat tensely at the picnic table opposite Daniel, suddenly wishing that she could just get up and run away. Instead, she just sat there nervously, wringing her hands in her lap, waiting for him to speak. "Daniel?" Sophia cringed at the panic in her voice. After what seemed like an eternity, Daniel looked at her fully. He took off the gray cap and ran a hand through his disheveled dark brown hair. His piercing blue eyes had never failed to take her breath away. In fact, Daniel Francis' eyes were one of the many reasons that Sophia had said yes when he had proposed to her a year ago during their 2-year anniversary dinner at Luigi's. Sophia felt a lump forming in the back of her throat as she remembered that night, and as she looked down at the diamond engagement ring on her finger it felt as though its sparkle and shine were only mocking her now. Her heart began beating rapidly, and she felt the first sharp pang of heartbreak as Daniel's once bright and piercing eyes that had always lit up when he looked at her now had a distant and dull expression, as though she were a complete stranger. Sophia fought back tears as the full realization of betrayal hit her. Feeling like she was living out a bad dream, Daniel finally spoke, but after all the waiting for it, Sophia desperately wished he would say nothing. She wished time would just stop completely so that she could leave Daniel at the picnic table and run somewhere, anywhere but here. Unfortunately, time did not stop, and Daniel spoke out what Sophia now knew. "I'm sorry, Sophia, but I've met someone else." There it was, hanging thick in the air between them. Daniel looked relieved, and as Sophia looked into his eyes one last time she saw a stranger. Whatever had happened to change him, it was clear to her in that moment that he was no longer her Daniel. In that instant of realization something unexplainable and miraculous began to come over Sophia. It was like a veil over her eyes had been removed and she felt free. Freed from what exactly she was not sure, but a sudden calm came over her, and then an odd sensation of displacement, as though she did not belong there and never had belonged there at all. Suddenly the world around her shifted as though in slow motion, like an old snapshot caught in time, but fading more and more from her view. It was then she noticed the cool air splashing her cheeks as the wind picked up the fallen autumn leaves, causing them to swirl around the pavilion. Through what felt like a great distance Sophia strained to hear whatever else Daniel was trying to say, and it seemed as though he might have sensed the shift too, because he cupped his hands around his mouth and yelled as though there was a great distance between them. "Her name is—" She never heard the rest, because that was the moment everything changed completely. Sophia had no memory of leaving the pavilion or getting up from the picnic table. Had the wind carried her? Was she just in shock and did not remember leaving? Whatever the reason, Sophia found herself walking up a very steep and unfamiliar incline. She knew Asbury Park very well. In fact, she had taken many walks there, yet she had no memory of any incline or a terrain like this. Gasping to catch her breath, Sophia felt compelled to keep going as though some unseen forces were drawing her onward, even though her legs were aching and she was thirsty. Sophia then noticed a sign for an unfamiliar trail and her heart skipped a beat. What in the world was happening? Her knees buckled at the unbelievable sight in front of her. It seemed she was now heading towards the impossible, a glacial valley ending at the base of a massive mountain. She stopped open-mouthed as wisps of a faint blue mist curled their way around the mountain. The sky above was full of big white billowy clouds lazily easing their way across the mountain's massive shoulder, and as Sophia watched, she was quite certain that she had never seen anything so beautiful or terrifying in her life. Sophia knew that Asbury Park had no such mountain, not to mention the fact that the entire season seemed to have changed in an instant. She began to perspire in the blaze of the hot afternoon sun and quickly shed the anorak jacket, and as she breathed in the intoxicating scent of wildflowers, Sophia shook her head in disbelief. Surely there could be no doubt that the season was now impossibly well into summer. Needing to think, she stopped walking and began pacing back and forth across the trail while nervously chewing at her lower lip. She was beginning to doubt herself, and she wondered now if she really had gone into shock back at the pavilion and was actually having some kind of dissociative dream or crazy hallucination. If she thought her world had ended when Daniel broke off their engagement, that experience seemed minor compared to what she was facing now. Longing to be back in the security and comfort of her familiar apartment, Sophia looked at her wristwatch, stricken to see that the usually reliable watch appeared to have stopped working altogether. It was as though her wish back at the park pavilion for time to stop had actually come true. Stifling a sob, Sophia looked in the direction of the mountain. It no longer looked majestic or beautiful to her. Instead it seemed imposing and uncaring, and in her desperation, she cried out loud, "Please God, help me." Sophia had not prayed often in her life, but if ever there was a time for prayer, surely it was now. Somehow, even in distress, she had the presence of mind to notice a big white rock on the side of the trail. Oddly, she had not seen it before, and at the sight of it she realized just how weak and shaky she was feeling. She sat gingerly down on the rock and lowered her head into her hands, fighting off the impulse to cry uncontrollably. She was scared, more scared than she had ever been in her life, and yet instead of crying, she surprised herself by bowing her head and once again pleading for help. "God, if you can hear me, please help me." The moments ticked slowly and painfully for what seemed an eternity to Sophia as she sat there helplessly on the rock, until suddenly and miraculously, she heard a voice. Sophia looked up to see a man standing in front of her who looked to be in his 50s, and her eyes filled with grateful tears at the sight of him. He looked back at her with kind gray eyes. He had darkly tanned, weathered skin as though he had spent a lot of time out in the sun. His brown hair was streaked gray, and he wore a funny blue cap that made her think of a train conductor. In fact, he did look like a train conductor. He had on a pair of grease-streaked overalls with the initials TC embroidered in white on the front pocket. Sophia was so relieved to see another human being that she could not help but smile at him. He smiled a big broad smile back at her right away, and she began to feel more at ease. In fact, Sophia immediately thought him endearing in a rugged sort of way. She was the first to speak. "Oh, thank God, sir, I am so relieved to see you. I seem to be lost." Here her voice trailed off as she was at a loss to explain how she had gotten there or her predicament. She tried to continue. "I know it must seem terribly strange, but one minute I was in Asbury Park and then, well then." Once again, she found herself at a loss for words. Seeing her struggle, the man spoke, and Sophia found his voice to be soft-spoken and as kind as his eyes. "Oh yes, miss, I would rightly say that you are quite a long way from Asbury Park. In fact, it looks like you have entered a time portal." Sophia heart did a flip-flop in her chest. Oh, this kind man must be crazy. Her normally light green eyes turned into a darker emerald green as she felt panic rise within her again. Maybe she had not heard him correctly. Fighting an overwhelming impulse to run, she willed herself to speak to him again. "I beg your pardon, sir, I am truly having the strangest day. Did you say I have entered a time portal?" "Yes, miss, but I do want to reassure you that these sorts of things don't happen by accident." Sophia shook her head slowly in disbelief, certain that she must not have heard him correctly. Deeply shaken, she watched him take out a large gold watch with a long old-fashioned gold chain fob from the front pocket of his overalls. He looked at the watch thoughtfully before speaking again. "My watch never lies, miss. I know this is all a mite hard to take in at first, but when my trusty watch stops telling time, it's always a sign. I reckoned I might need to make a stop here just in case someone might be waiting, and sure enough here you are." Sophia's jaw dropped open and she drew in a sharp breath as she fought back another wave of panic. "You mean your watch stopped telling the time too? I don't understand what is happening." The man's gray eyes softened at her distress, and he gestured to the empty space next to her on the big white rock. "Mind if I sit for a spell, miss?" Sophia nodded soberly and he sat down beside her looking pensive. "Did you by any chance pray for help, miss?" Sophia's eyes widened with astonishment, and she wondered now if this man was some sort of magician or a mind reader. "As a matter of fact, I did pray, and well, to be perfectly honest, praying is not something I have done too much of in my life." "How did you know I prayed?" Her heart started beating unbearably fast and she grew lightheaded. Suddenly she did not want to hear his answer, suddenly she wanted desperately to run away from him, but she was beginning to feel dizzy and as though she might faint. Seeing her distress, he quickly pulled a small canteen out of what seemed to be the limitless pockets of his overalls. He handed it to her and urged her to drink. "Please, miss, you need water." Sophia pushed back any misgivings she felt about taking the water from a stranger and she drank gratefully. The dizziness subsided right away, and her head cleared a bit. Patting her reassuringly on the shoulder, he then handed her a clean white, and beautifully embroidered, handkerchief. She felt oddly soothed by the sight of it and pressed it to her eyes and cheeks. As she did this, her senses were pleasantly engulfed by the handkerchief's clean and soothing scent of lavender. There, Sophia, it's all going to work out just fine, you'll see. You just need to have a little faith. There is a train scheduled to arrive shortly, just at the base of the mountain." Sophia stared openly at him, shaking her head once again in disbelief. "Wait, how is it that you know my name? Is there a train coming here?" Incredulous, Sophia looked toward the base of the mountain and sure enough she could now see train tracks. How had she not seen them before? She was stuttering now, "I don't understand." Suddenly he slipped off the rock with agility that surprised her. He then pulled out a single shiny gold ticket from the initial front pocket of his overalls and handed it to her. "Here is your train ticket, miss. I really must be on my way, but don't you worry because it's all going to work out just fine." Sophia jumped up from the rock suddenly seized with renewed fear. "Oh no, please don't go." Tears welled up instantly in her eyes and threatened to spill down her cheeks at the sight of him turning and getting ready to walk away in the direction of the mountain. In a panic Sophia yelled out after him, "Oh wait, please don't go. At least not yet, I need to ask you something before I can decide whether to board this train that you say is coming." He stopped walking and turned fully around to face her before giving her a reassuring smile. Sophia then noticed just the hint of a knowing twinkle in his eye and suddenly felt inexplicably relieved and less afraid. "Please do ask, miss." Sophia struggled for a moment as she worked up the courage to continue, because she was well aware of the highly unusual circumstances she now found herself in, and she was starting to think this kind stranger might somehow be more than what he appeared to be. Clearing her throat, She gathered up the courage to speak to him honestly. When Daniel broke off our engagement, for one of the most awful reasons imaginable by the way, betrayal. And here she did have to stop a moment to catch her breath as she was shaken anew by the awful truth of it. Well, I thought my life was over, but then this happened. Finding herself at a loss to adequately explain the unbelievable events of the day, Sophia chose instead to wave at the broad expanse of majestic scenery all around them, including the mountain. Well, the thing is, and I do apologize for this because you have been so kind, but I am still not entirely sure you are even real. I mean, after all, you could be a figment of my imagination or a hallucination. However, even as she said these words, they sounded hollow and unconvincing to her. She well knew how very real every aspect of what was happening felt to her. Slightly anxious, she chewed at her lip, feeling a bit embarrassed now at having said so much out loud, but she was determined, in spite of her discomfort, to say everything that was on her mind. I'm just suddenly not sure of anything at all. I thought my life was all set and things made sense, but now here I am, at this crossroads or time portal as you have called it, which I have to say is still a very hard thing to believe could be true, and I don't know what to do. So, this is what I wanted to ask you before you go, before I decide whether to get on board this train or not. Suddenly and in a manner very akin to a train conductor, T.C. raised his hand before she could ask the question and gestured for her to stop. His kind gray eyes searched her face intently. Miss Sophia, I do reckon you are going through a lot of emotions right now. Folks don't always decide to board the train, some turn back, and I just want you to know they always find their way back to their once familiar surroundings again, and you can do that too. It's entirely your choice, Miss Sophia. You can keep going on into the unknown, or you can choose to go back to what is familiar. It's up to you. I just wanted to be sure you knew that, miss, before you asked your question. Sophia's heart fluttered in her chest, and she swallowed hard. Although she was nervous and scared to hear the answer, she was finally ready and able to ask the question. Well, here is my question. I wanted to know, will I be able to come back? I mean back to my home someday, if I do decide to get on the train? T.C. smiled his big broad, comforting smile at her, and relief once again flooded through her at the sight of it. His eyes seemed to be twinkling more than ever as he answered her, "Why yes, Miss Sophia, you most certainly can, but chances are you probably won't want to, at least that's how most folks wind up feeling. When destiny calls."